Okay, so I want you to know that I have already covered a lot of missing requirements, warnings, and tips when it comes to the execution of the moves that you're supposed to make in step 3 of task 3A. So I'm not going to repeat what I went over there. So if you skipped straight to example 2, the download and the video, know that there is missing information, warnings, and tips and advice that I go over in example 1, in the example 1 video that applies generally to any decision that you make with respect to completing this assignment. Okay, so I'm just letting you know that. All right, so then let's go ahead and look at example 2. I will not be repeating stuff that I've already said that generally applies. I will just focus in on highlighting particular things about this example, possibly going over new tips, advice, or requirements specific to this kind of example. So again, you see that I have the performance is outstanding, A level. Remember that D means satisfactory. Supposedly, not everyone gives credit for D. C means meets minimum expectations, does an fairly good job. B means above average, did better than people who simply met expectations for something. And then A means outstanding. That means that such submissions were above those who were above average. So, earning an A is quite the accomplishment and not easy to come by. It requires a lot of intellectual perseverance. So that said, the response that I'm going to show you, if I were grading only for step 2 and step 3, that is copying and pasting this part, which you get no credit just for doing that, maybe 5 points. So maybe some credit, but hardly any. But if I was just grading for this part, the discussion paragraphs, and following the instructions to include this part, that's what this grade would be. Of course, how well you do following the requirements for step 1 of task 3A and showing attention to missing details also impacts your score. So in this set of examples, what we have is 2 arguments, and the arguments do reflect definite positions. However, the arguments have what we would call side-by-side conflicting or opposing conclusions. So one person did a definite stance, and the other person did not. Both took a definite stance, but one person said, "I think A," and the other person said, "I don't think A," or "I think not A." All right. So the word count is about 609 words. I did make some little edits in the paragraph after I did the word count, but it should still be close. Like I said in the other video, the word count and hence example does not include steps 1 and 2. That's a lie. Step 2 is right here. Just remember that there are missing elements of this that I went over in another video, in the example 1 video. Okay, so what I've done now is I'm using a new example, this is from an actual student submission from a previous semester, and I decided to keep using this example since you're already familiar with it. But Jennifer was the speaker or writer in example 1, and now Daphne is the speaker or writer in example 2, and she's comparing her view to Jennifer. In the other example, Jennifer was comparing her view to someone else, or I should say, yeah, comparing and contrasting, analyzing the views, seeing what was similar and different. Notice that in this example, the student who is doing the talking or the writing did not follow all of the instructions. This student did not highlight the key terms, any key terms from a definition, as should have been embedded in her statements. So the reason why you don't see any words highlighted, one reason why there's no words highlighted, well, is that there's none. So this student, Daphne, did not follow the original instructions in the video that were given on argument by definition. She did not pull explicitly from 2 cited definitions and weave them into the reason paragraphs. And so, of course, if she didn't do that, then she didn't highlight those words. So chances are she didn't watch all of the video or take notes or something. But what she does this time is she's following more instructions better. So remember I said in example 1, If you did not do a certain step or you see that other students did things that you didn't do, you cannot change your answer. You will not get credit for this assignment, maybe a 50, probably a 0. If you change your answer to make it look like everyone else's or to revise it to show, to make it such that you now, after the fact, follow instructions that were given in video. So she did the right thing. She didn't change her answer based on what she saw everyone else doing who followed the instructions. So that's good. Okay, so now we're going to go into, so if you haven't done so yet, you should go ahead and read Daphne's original response to the item 1 prompt, or a version of the item 1 prompt, just so you can see what it is that's being discussed in the example, because if you don't know what she said, it's harder to follow. Every time I grade this, I have to reread both the original responses, and I've already given my reasons for that. All right, so assuming that you've paused the video and you've read the responses, hopefully you read this one again, let's go ahead and go over what's going on in these paragraphs. And again, guys, I want you to keep in mind that the only way in which these paragraphs are templates has to do with the fact that I already gave you the template in the instructions in other videos, right? So the only way to use this as a template is to say, okay, you have a bold sentence, that's the first sentence. It's going to make a claim that, there's a similarity or a difference, which is very general. And then the next sentence or two is going to provide evidence from the text, for that claim of similarity or difference. And then the other sentences are going to unpack those quotes, elaborate, explain, and defend the idea that the quotes themselves justify what is stated in bold in the first sentence. What I don't want you to do is think that, okay, I have to have just as many sentences as she does in the sample paragraphs. I have to use hence, in my third sentence. I have to use I think in my second sentence. In the first 3 sentences, I have to do this. And then in the fourth sentence, I have to put quotation marks around words. That's not the point of this. All of the paragraphs that you will have seen with all of the examples that I provide are merely examples, just that. The general steps have to be made. You see how they're being made, but I don't want you to think, okay, I'm just gonna, erase some of her words and plug in some words from our 2 arguments. It doesn't work like that. That's not critical thinking. That's not college level writing skills, analysis, and interpretation. So I'm just making sure, like I said in another video, I have students who are 15 and still learning. I have students who are 50 and maybe have forgotten certain things. So I have to make sure that we're all aware and remembering these things. Okay, so with that said, we're going to go ahead and get into this example. And keep in mind that in example 1, we looked at how somebody might discuss a similarity and discuss a difference. And that example was focused on 2 arguments that had the same conclusion, the same identical conclusion. In this example, we're looking at somebody compare the response to someone who has a conclusion that opposes their own. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. One thing that our arguments have in common, albeit for opposing conclusions, regards our attention to scientific inquiry. Okay, so notice that in this, and notice, I want you to compare the examples. Look at the bold statements. Look at all the different ways you can meet, this part, right, of task 3A, right, the first sentence in the paragraph. You should, by the time I post all the examples, you'll have 8 examples of how you can construct the first sentence. Notice that this one uses the word in common to let the reader know, to let Jennifer know that the speaker will focus on what is similar between the 2 responses or what is alike between the 2 responses. So those are different words that you could use. You could start off the sentence with using the word in some common in some way, or similar, or similarity, or alike. All right. And I'm not sure that I stressed this enough in example 1, but as we go through example 2 and reflecting back on what you saw in example 1, notice how the speakers never use the word agree, which is what I iterated in a previous video. I don't want to see you talking about how you right now agree with something that they say or don't say. Don't even say that you, in your response, agree with their response. Your argument from the past is not agreeing with anything. It is just making an argument. And also notice how in the examples that I have given thus far, right now I'm in example 2, the 3rd paragraph, as an example of a paragraph, notice that there's no language about, I like what you had to say, I don't like what you had to say. There's no judgment in terms of evaluation. There's nothing about you did a good job doing this, you did a good job doing that. So notice in the examples how the speakers / writers pay attention to the video instruction and written instructions that I gave to you earlier in this task. All right, so we see this when you cite how there have been various test studies and experiments that have tried to prove these claims to be true. In my argument, we see this when I say, to prove something is true, research and experiments need to be completed. So again, here we've got the next technical move, right? They immediately go into citing evidence from each argument, letting us know what textual evidence from an argument recorded in the past they'll be working with. They do a good job with introductory clauses that, if necessary, provide a little bit of context and fluidity for what is about to come within the quoted material. I know who is speaking when because the speaker says I and you. The speaker goes on to say, I think that my use of research, so remember what quotations around words mean, in my statement, so when she's referring back to what she's unpacking the statement that she self-quoted, right? And I've already talked about unpacking your statements, unpacking your evidence. So I think my use of research in my statement, the one that she has here, captures not only what we both refer to in the word experiments. So she's here saying that they both used the word experiment. And that is true. They both say that. Okay, so but also with what you are referring to when you use the words test and studies. So notice how she's unpacking, trying to make the case. She offered the statements as evidence, and now she's unpacking the evidence and offering evidence from within the evidence to elaborate on and build the case for a claim of similarity, that something is in common, that there is something alike between the two arguments. All right, so hence we both show attention to activities humans can or have engaged in to determine truth about some concern. So now she's offering an interpretation based on the evidence. Nowhere in the arguments did anyone say human activities. Notice how she's offering an interpretation here. Okay, so then she said, but she doesn't get the interpretation from nowhere, she's getting it from the evidence. So it's a plausible interpretation, an informed, evidence-based interpretation. I notice, that's cool. You can say things like, I observe, I notice, okay? I notice that you also talk about how results have been inconclusive when it comes to test studies and experiments, later using the word results to say that at least one study about masking and the spread of the virus has led to confusion for some. Your combined use of test studies, experiments, inconclusive results suggests that you were thinking of scientific inquiry. So again, the student is now pulling more words, not only from her peers or Jennifer's statement that she quoted, but from other elements of her argument. So that would be okay. I just don't want you to have like more than one whole statement cited or too many significant chunks. But if you want to call attention to words that name fundamental and powerful concepts in your own thinking or peers' thinking that are used outside of the quoted statement to make your case, you can do that just as Daphne? Daphne does here. And I'm definitely going to make a second video to continue explaining this example. All right, so you say, then I think I'll start a second video. All right.